Dr. King is the current director of the Center of Tobacco Products at the FDA and the former deputy director for research translation at the CDC's Office of Smoking and Health. He will talk about how the CTP uses modeling research in its regulatory decision-making. Brian, whenever you're ready, well, please take it away.
So good day to you all. Pleasure to be here. As Ken was noting, a sizable portion of my time is dedicated to engaging with politicians and lawyers and other bureaucrats. So I am pleased as punch to be here to talk some science for a refreshing change. As many know, I am a scientist by training, and it's good to see a lot of familiar names and also faces on the session today, and pleased to be giving you an overview of how CTP sees the importance of computational modeling. And so here's a little bit of an agenda for us today, just some brief background, and then I'm going to give some examples, particularly related to the product standards that can nicely set the stage for us today, including our proposed rules on menthol cigarettes and flavored cigars, and also the work related to the nicotine product standard, which we have announced our intent to propose a rule. I also want to briefly touch on some challenges, but as well as opportunities in the field of computational modeling, and finally some closing thoughts. So without further ado, I did want to note that the decisions that FDA has to make on tobacco product regulation almost always include the integration of multiple lines of evidence. So we use this approach to ensure that we're going to capture that full scope of scientific factors that are going to underpin a decision. And so it's critical that we look at that from multiple angles. So for example, these lines of evidence can be things on behavioral data on product appeal or addictiveness and toxicity, and how those impacts are going to relate to tobacco product use behavior and also disease risk. That said, computational modeling can be a really important tool to integrate evidence to assess those various tobacco regulatory actions, including those potential impacts. And that can be on things like newer modified risk tobacco products, where we're reviewing applications for, or also new regulatory actions, which is going to be our focus today. And this population-based approach that we can get for modeling is particularly important when we think about that appropriate for protection of public health standard that FDA has been afforded by Congress in terms of regulating tobacco products, which requires us to look at that net benefit and risk of products at the population level. And it also is important so we can assess impacts in a variety of ways. So we want to look at short and long-term impacts and measures on things like tobacco product use, as well as tobacco-related morbidity and mortality. And that said, when it comes to those long-term impacts on death and disease due to changes in tobacco use behavior, that modeling is going to be particularly well suited to generate that information for us. So aside from the importance of modeling in our application reviews, as I noted around that APPH standard and other factors, today I really want to laser focus on the work that we're doing around several product standards that are foundational product standards that the FDA presently has in the queue and that Ken already previously highlighted at a higher level. So let's start with the menthol cigarettes proposed rule. So computational modeling can play a really important role in characterizing the public health burden due to tobacco products, and also assessing that potential public health impact of that regulatory action. And the menthol proposed product standard is a really good example of that. And as a reminder, we did propose this rule last year. We did receive over 250,000 comments on this one, in addition to the flavored cigars. And so we're in the process of getting through those comments, but we're intent on finalizing this rule by the end of this year. And the proposed rule included results that were obtained using a compartmental model that simulates the public health impact of cigarettes and also e-cigarettes over time. It was largely based on work on a model by Levy and colleagues. And there were assumptions regarding changes in smoking behavior due to the menthol rule that were implemented using data from an expert elicitation, which was specifically developed to assess that impact of the rule. And so here you're seeing some of the results of that modeling that, again, helped us to weigh what that net benefit would be as a result of the menthol product standard. And so what we found as a result of it was that by assuming a menthol prohibition beginning in 2021, the model found that it's expected that overall smoking would decline by 15% as early as 2026. 2026 due to menthol smokers quitting or alternatively also switching to lower risk alternatives, specifically e-cigarettes. But also these transitions were projected to reduce cumulative smoking and e-cigarette attributable deaths by 650,000 over a 40-year period, and that is from 2021 to 2060. And so you can see really in action the profound public health implications that can be gleaned as a result of this modeling behavior, which again helps us weigh that net impact on the population. So here's going to be an example from our presently proposed product standard to prohibit flavors in cigars. This is on the same track as the menthol cigarette one. We proposed it last year. This was part of that bolus of 250,000 comments, and where we're on track to complete and finalize this by the end of the year. It is on the president's unified agenda as well, which helps to grease the wheels to get things done. And so in terms of estimating the health benefits of this particular product standard, FDA did publish an analysis by Rostron and colleagues in 2019 that examined the potential effects of the standard on each cohort of 18-year-olds in the United States. We did update the estimates using the same approach. We were included, which these were in the notice of proposed rulemaking on flavored cigars back in 2022. I will note that Brian Rostron from our Office of Science is going to be presenting more on this during tomorrow's session, so I don't want to steal the thunder. But in brief, some of the underlying parameters for the model, mortality benefits from increased cigar smoking cessation were estimated using data from localities that had already enacted policies limiting the sale of flavored tobacco products, and that includes cigars. And then the changes in cigar use prevalence due to deterred initiation and continuing use were estimated using PATH. And then Monte Carlo simulations were also used to conduct an account for the uncertainty using risk modeling software. And so a lot of different data sources were used to inform the modeling to, again, make it as robust as possible. So as many of you know, CTP is also in the process of considering a proposed rule to cap the amount of nicotine in cigarettes and certain other combustibles. As I noted yesterday at the e-cigarette summit, this is a long time coming. We've been talking about this. Has been a glimmer in the eye for the better part of the past 30 years. And so it's really groundbreaking and refreshing that we're at the precipice of making this happen. FDA has announced its intent to propose the rule, and I will tell you that is priority number 3 after the other 2 product standards to get out as soon as possible. So in terms of the preliminary work to help inform that, CTP did develop a dynamic population model that can be used to evaluate the potential population health impact that would be associated with the introduction of new tobacco products or policies. And so as was noted, we did publish an article in New England Journal of Medicine in 2018 that showed that potential public health effects of the nicotine rule using that modeling framework. This is the infamous Appelberg et al. That is frequently mentioned both here and out in the scientific ether. And in that paper specifically, we used a dynamic population model, and we quantified the potential public health effects of enacting that regulation that makes cigarettes minimally addictive. And we also published that notice of proposed rulemaking for the nicotine rule using the results from this Appelberg analysis. That said, I want to proactively apologize for the density of this slide. It's not intended to be an eye exam, but I want you to get the general gist of the complexities and how all the underlying science can help inform a very clear and concise message. And so basically, this figure is going to describe how the model works at a high level. So it accounted for 9 different combinations of product use patterns and 27 transitions between those patterns. So very complex, but really useful data to help inform our decision making. I also want to caveat that FDA has revised this model and the inputs to develop updated impact estimates for the proposed rule. But those figures I cannot publicly share with you at this time. For obvious reasons, since things are still in development, but I did want to note that we are in the process of revising it, of course, as new data inputs become available. So in terms of how this translates then into easily digestible information that we can then use as policymakers and decision makers, here's some of the results on this slide from the Appelberg et al. Paper, which considered the nicotine standard. So in terms of actual results, as you can see here, there would be a profound public health impact, including 5 million smokers who would quit within the first year. And by the year 2100, a 1.4% U.S. adult smoking rate and 8 million premature deaths averted. And so I will note that this is a really high-level summary, but for folks who may be interested in getting more into the guts of this model, Esther Salazar from CTP's Office of Science is going to present later today on FDA's population health modeling approach to estimate the impacts of this product standard. So stay tuned if you want more intel. And this is just intended to be a high-level overview to wet your whistle a bit. So now, before I close, I did want to articulate some challenges and opportunities. And so when we're conducting these models and interpreting their results, it's really important that we note there's going to be several challenges, particularly areas of uncertainty. As scientists, we know that exists in anything we do. There's always some level of uncertainty, and there's ways that we can address that. But these are areas that may include things around structural assumptions of the model, parameter inputs, variability among individuals in the population, and then also at the more micro level of examples of how that extends specifically to our regulatory work. Some examples are things like difficulty in accurately assessing the real-world impact of a new product or new marketing in a pre-market setting. You can also have uncertainty around the risk of a new product in the absence of a long-term epidemiological evidence. You could also have uncertainty about the impact of policies that have never even been implemented before, as we're seeing with some of these. And so you really have to be scientifically creative, but also scientifically sound. And that's a very careful balance. There's certainly limitations with models, but on balance, there's also things that you can do to help address that. And so here are three things that the Center for Tobacco Products really looks at in terms of opportunities to address those areas of uncertainty and also maximize the scientific robustness of the models that we do produce. And so, for example, transparency and documentation of the model inputs and assumptions is absolutely essential. The more transparency on what we used in the models can better help you account for the different factors and how different outputs may modulate depending on what the inputs are. Additionally, comparisons of results across different modeling approaches is really helpful as well. So, classic Hill criteria in terms of being able to reduce things in consistency and reproduce them over time is a really important factor. And so looking at models with different components and comparisons across those can really be quite telling in terms of identifying specific drivers and what may be accounting for the differences between those models and their ultimate outputs. And also finally, quantifying how uncertainty in inputs translates into uncertainty in outputs. And this is particularly critical as well. Frequently we turn to sensitivity analysis, frequently in FDA regulatory impact analyses, and also modeling. You see a slew of these types of analyses to make sure that we're accounting for all of those levels of uncertainty and being able to quantify the extent that certain inputs do have on the ultimate outputs and how we can best account for that. So with that, I'll just bring it home before we open up for some question and answer. But the bottom line from CTP is that, we regulate tobacco products using that population health standard, where we're required to consider those risks to individuals as well as the impact on the U.S. population. And that said, we look at a variety of different data sources and disciplines, and modeling certainly serves a critical role in terms of informing our regulatory actions by incorporating those products' risks and also use behaviors to protect those potential impacts of different regulatory decisions. We do have modeling as an ingrained component of not only our application reviews for new products, but also for new regulations that we release, and it continues to be a central component of our portfolio when we're evaluating the scientific evidence to inform the decisions that we do ultimately make in terms of applications or regulations, and also in other aspects of our portfolio at the center. And that said, some useful features of models to inform tobacco product regulation include the relative impact of different regulatory options and also potential countervailing effects, such as tobacco product substitution. We really want to account for all the different factors out there in the ether and make sure that we can fully project and visualize what could potentially happen as a result of the actions that we're doing. And that said, modeling allows us to do that very effectively, particularly in the long term when we're looking at net impacts not only on tobacco product use behavior, but also tobacco-related disease and death. So with that, I will close my bureaucratic mouthpiece and we can open it up for some hopefully fruitful question and answer with my colleague, Dr. Warner.